Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to cover a typical middle game position that's going to show up in your Sicilians on move 14. And this is the critical position here. And you can go ahead and take a look for a quick second and figure out what you would play in this position. I am going to go ahead and play it through from the beginning. And before we get here, though, I do want to cover the middle game. And in this situation, I made the wrong move. There is one move here for white that is clearly the best, and a couple of moves that are okay, that are still good. One of which I considered, which was f4 here, just meaning to take advantage of the fact that my queen has control of this square. And once that f3 pawn is out of the way, I can get the bishop over to e2. Exerting some attack on the knight here. That knight jumping into to g3 though, forking that same bishop as well as the rook and demanding that I move the rook out of the way, makes that f4 move, while okay, not the best move here. And then the second best move that the computer gives in this position here, and you can pause your video if you're not ready, is going to be knight c to e2. And what the computer notices here is that this dark knight here, with which the following sequence, we chased it over to the rim. When we chase the knight over here to h5 in the Sicilian, it has access to these two squares here. So it has access to f4, and it also has access to g3. And from there, it's attacking the bishop and the rook and any piece that we decide to put onto e2. And so moving the knight, the c knight, over to e2 gives us control of these two squares before that knight can get over there. And then maybe later we can go and attack that knight in other ways. Maybe we can bring the bishop over to h3 and then into g4 and then exert pressure on the knight that way. And the best way to save the knight at that point will be a g6 pawn push, and then black has to retreat the knight back to g7. So knight c to e2, second best move in this position. And then there's one more move. This is the best move by quite a ways, by at least half a point on the analysis, and that is going to be bishop to h3. And I didn't find this move. I actually played bishop to e2 in this situation, which brings me from a plus 1.5, which I would have had if I had played this. It brought me to a minus 0.27, giving the advantage to black and giving black the ability to jump in here. And okay, so the point of this move now is we've gotten one of the two pieces that are going to be, I'm going to say forked, but multiple attacked by black's knight once black knight were to jump into g3, which the computer still says is black's best move in the situation. And now, of course, we have to play rook to h2, and now it's sort of up to black to figure out how to get that knight out of there. And so that's the best move there. Instead, I played bishop to e2. I played bishop to e2, and now as a result, I had no square because my bishop is on the e2 square. My knight, which is now under attack from the pawn, has no square that it can jump to that it's not attacked except for over here on the rim. So black has a knight on the rim, and I have a knight on the rim. The difference between our two knights is his is great, mine sucks. Because his knight can jump to one of these other two squares, putting immediate pressure, and then he can trade it off. He can be done with that knight. It's out of the game, and he's either getting a rook or a light squared bishop for it. And what am I going to get for my knight? I'm not going to get much, so I'm going to have to fight for this. So he solidifies the pawn. And now my plan, quite simply here, is to force a queen trade, still jump my knight into the only square that it can go to, still putting pressure on that light squared bishop. And I end up with this stacked pawn as a result. And the engine gives this position as -2 for black. So I went from having a +1 to a -2 with this sequence where I decided that it was okay for my knight to have to swing over to the corner and then to have to bring my queen up and initiate all these trades over here, and I've just lost an increment of 3. So how do we save this position? That's the question. Well, one of our pluses here, we're still, kind of technically in the middle game. We got a couple bishops on the board and both rooks, almost all the pawns. So this is kind of still middle game. What would you do to shore up this position here if you're white? Well, we know that this is coming. We know that there's absolutely no way that we can defend this pawn. So I figured what I should probably do is start with f4 and try to get my knight into the game. I wanted that f4 pawn off of that square, off of the f3 square, so that I could develop my knight. And I decided to grab space over here. So one of the things that we have here is resources that we have available to us in this current position, right? We have a spatial advantage over here on the queen side. Sorry, this is the king side. I castled queen side in this one. So we have a spatial advantage over here. So all of a sudden, when you have a spatial advantage, anytime that your opponent is going to make a move like this, where you can completely take over here, it's good. Just take your existing spatial advantage and make it even better. As long as you can continue to defend the bases of your pawn chains, then you're totally okay, and you're not going to give your opponent passed pawns. So we end up with a really nice structure here. And okay, we're not minus 2.2 anymore. We're minus 1.5, and the computer likes our spatial advantage here. And so now I absolutely need to get the knight developed, because as long as these two rooks and this bishop are all eyeing my pawn, I need to keep 3 defenders here. And the only way that I can free up one of my rooks to go do something else is if I get my knight down to this square, and then I have 3 defenders, and then I'm free, well then I have 4 defenders, and I'm free to let one of them go roam and do some other work. Good news for us here as well is we have an attack on this pawn. Okay, so he redirects, and now he has a double attack on my pawn, and I am only sitting here with a single defender. So what you can do is you can pause the video here and figure out what you would do. Pushing the pawn is not an option because you're going to drop your knight, and dropping the knight comes with tempo on the rook, so you will have to move your rook and you'll simply be down a knight. So that's not going to be a good move. And what the computer wants to see here is rook to d6, but I go ahead and I play a different move, and what I decide to do is cut off his rook from attacking that pawn. So now he effectively only has 1 attacker on it, and I have my 1 defender, so I'm good. And simultaneously, this defender is this piece is defended by 2 of my pieces, so it's a nice strong piece, and it comes with the threat. And the threat that it comes with is that I'm going to take this light squared bishop, the same light squared bishop that I was chasing earlier in the game. So I really liked this move. Unfortunately, it was only the 3rd best move. What the computer says I should go ahead and do here is just take. Now, the problem with this position now, and why you saw the 3rd best move for me in this position, and not the top engine move, is what you can't see is right now my opponent has 7 seconds left on his clock, and I have 36 seconds left on my clock. So I found a good move and just decided to play it, knowing that it likely wasn't going to lose me the game on the spot, and it was going to thwart my opponent's current plan when he only had 7 seconds left on his clock, and now he has 7 seconds to come up with a new plan and execute the first move of that plan to stop his clock from ticking down. So while the computer is cutthroat in these situations, when you get down into time trouble and you've got 30 seconds or less left on your clock, or you're trying to just keep your opponent in time pressure, if you find the 2nd or 3rd best move that the engine gives to you and it's not catastrophic, don't be too down on yourself. If I was in a rapid game and I had 6 minutes left on my clock or something like this, then I would have expected to have found this move. I would have had a little bit more chance to evaluate it and carry it out all the way. But on the surface, this is totally fine. So I cut it off, and he gets the bishop out of there. And now I have a nice sneaky little move, knight to b5. Now I've got a nice double attack going on this pawn. And I expect him to just push it, because then he'll have 3 piece control there, and I only have 2. But instead he decides to retreat into a defensive shell, and all of a sudden now we're plus 2.5. My opponent has 2 seconds left on his clock. Look, I didn't have to find the best move. I found the 3rd best move, and it's up to my opponent with 7 seconds left on his clock to find the best move or have a completely lost position. But one of the reasons here, though, is I have played good defense. I've made sure that I have 3 pieces defending the 1 square here. All of a sudden, I somehow got his bishop that was attacking down here to retreat and drive it all the way back into its back corner. Like, massive wins for us, even though we didn't there. And we just sort of play through. And all of a sudden now we're in a really interesting position in the game where my opponent has 4 seconds left on his clock and I have 10 seconds left on my clock. So I went from 36 seconds down to 10 seconds. And at this point, me with the advantage, it's absolutely up to me to figure out a plan. And what I decided I wanted to do was create an opening over here at all costs, drive a rook in, and then just threaten a mate over here. And with 4 seconds left on his clock, my opponent wasn't necessarily thinking about mate or anything. So really some time constraint issues when your opponent is sitting there. One of the curious things to know too is I kept my rooks on these squares here. Even as I was going through this position, I kept in mind where my opponent's bishops were. I knew I was going to keep my rooks down here on my 2nd rank. And so I just kept an eye on which squares on that 7th rank his bishops were attacking, and made sure that whatever plan I came up with, I was only going to utilize squares for my rooks that his bishops weren't hitting. So hopefully you guys got a lot out of this video. Could almost turn it into an opening video, just a little bit for those of you looking for some openings. I recommend the Closed Sicilian, as you guys know, and against d6 we're going to play here. And what we're hoping in a situation like this is that we don't get knight to c6. If we don't get knight to c6, if we just get knight to f6 instead, we get the bishop to here. Then we get knight to c6, then the queen is to here, then you get a structure here, and now you're solid here. And you're going to end up castling queenside, and you've got your nice battery going on here. The knight can never jump to this square, putting pressure on the queen and the dark squared bishop, because your light squared bishop is covering it, and you're going to end up with that pawn storm that we saw over here before, and try to go checkmate your opponent on the other side. So that's what we're hoping for. Now, when we go up against knight c6 in this d6 Sicilian, we bring the queen back to d2. We solidify our pawn. We fianchetto our bishop, we long castle, we drag the king over to b1. The reason we want the king over on b1 is because if at any point the black knight moves, then the queen-bishop combination can establish control of the g5 square, and that from there they'll be X-ray attacking through the queen and where the king was. So you got to get the king over to b1 in a lot of these structures. And besides, why not move the king over to b1? It's not like black can do anything here that you absolutely have to respond to. You're not losing out by this king to b1 move in any way, shape, or form. And when I come back into the engine eval, just to kind of prove this to you guys, I didn't check this part of it for the video. The engine gives king to b1 in this position as the best move, and it's really not even close. So king to b1 here, gotta know that as a Sicilian player, get your king off of that diagonal. And from here we can just begin our pawn storm. And this was the move that brought us to the beginning of the video. So I'm coming at it from the back, but I told you guys this is gonna be a middle game video, not an opening theory video. You guys are just getting some opening theory if you decided to hang around this long. Here is where I blundered and went wrong, and it is a blunder. by playing bishop to e2, allowing a knight to jump in here or here. G3 would have been better. Engine gives knight to G3 is a really solid move here. It likes B4 first, which my opponent did play. It's an easy move to find. So this is where we got to know, and this is a great time to test your memory. What is the best move that we're playing here? Went over it at the beginning of the video. I know I'm a little bit long-winded, so that was probably 14 minutes and 57 seconds ago. We're going to find that bishop to h3 is the best move here. And so now probably what I think the opponent should play is just g6 after bishop g4, threatening to win the knight and stack black's pawns and have an semi-open file to the king. This is actually what we're looking for. And then of course, black still has the option of coming down and attacking the rook, and black can obviously also just play the knight back to g7 here and save the knight and try to just dig himself out of this hole. Unfortunately, from this position here, moves like f4 are coming. And then what's funny is in this position, the computer gives knight to h5 as black's best move. So just some things to think about here. Bringing that old bishop out to h3 with this idea of coming over to hit the knight. And what's important to note here too is in this position, my opponent did not have to play knight to h5. Although knight to h5 by the engine is given as only slightly worse than knight to e8. And if knight to e8 here, if your opponent decides to play knight to e8 instead, then you're just going to continue your pawn walk. And what's beautiful now is black's best move in this position is still going to be b4. And now we have, as a result of not playing bishop to e2, we have this e2 square open for our knight. This is the natural square for the knight, giving pressure here, also saving its ability to jump to f3, where it can have influence on the g6 square as well as that d5 square. So really e2 is an ideal home for a knight in the closed Sicilian, and one of your knights is going to end up there. So blocking it with something like bishop to e2, I'm glad I got the victory in this game, but this was a real learning lesson for me in trying to figure out how to play this position. Now black is normally going to continue here with a5, and at this point we're going to have f4. We're just continuing the pawn walk all the way. Black is going to continue the pawn storm over here with a4. You guys have all seen this before, and one of the best ways to handle this position here is going to be the defensive-minded knight to c1, so that we do have that extra control over here. And as cramped as this looks for white over here, this is a position that you should be able to hold. Remember, if black does decide to open up this diagonal over here, we've got the knight defending this square, and we have the bishop defending both of these squares, and we have the king that's lending support as well. Black's always going to have a pawn here, and you'll always have a pawn here, so you're going to have a wall in front of your king. Black's bishop is never going to be able to get out to this diagonal because we control those, and from here our bishop has control of this diagonal. So while this looks kind of scary and cramped and things like that for white, white is still firmly ahead in this position here. So you're going to be completely fine here, and in this position actually black does not want to play a takes b3. Because white is going to have c takes b3, and now threats like queen to b7 don't really do anything because we have this knight here. We're really well positioned. Our pieces are going to start to come out, and look, we still have this massive space advantage over here on the king side. We know that our king is completely safe. Now all of a sudden this b5 pawn is an obstacle for black's knight to jump in. If that pawn wasn't on b4, then black's knight was on b4, it would have an ability to influence this square. We'd have to move the bishop out of the way at that point and allow the queen to have influence. So a lot of cool things going on here in this video. It took a lot of twists and turns. You guys really got your money's worth on this one if you made it this far, man. I gotta tell you. So if you like the content, like, subscribe. I'm just gonna keep hitting you with this stuff, and we'll see you on the next one.